Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the money you worked for your entire life is still sitting in your bank account, but it has silently lost its power. You can see the numbers on the screen, yet those numbers can no longer buy food, fuel, medicine, or security for your family. Nothing was stolen from you overnight. No robbery happened. No war was announced. And yet, your wealth is gone. This is not a fictional story, and it is not a future prediction. This has already happened many times in human history. Money feels permanent because we use it every single day. We trust it without questioning where it comes from or what gives it value. We exchange years of our lives for pieces of paper, digital numbers, or metal coins, believing that they will protect us in the future. But money itself has no value. It has power only as long as people believe in it. The moment that belief breaks, currencies collapse, sometimes slowly and sometimes all at once. Throughout history, every powerful empire and modern nation believed that their currency was different, stronger, and safer than the rest. They believed collapse happened only to others, to weak nations, poor governments, or failed systems. Yet history tells a very different story. From ancient empires to modern economies, the pattern is always the same. When governments overspend, when they manipulate money, and when trust is replaced by control, currencies begin to die. In this documentary, we will explore why currencies collapse by examining real historical case studies that destroyed entire economies and changed the lives of millions of ordinary people. These are not just economic stories. They are human stories. Stories of families who lost savings overnight, workers whose salaries became worthless, and societies that descended into chaos because money stopped working. More importantly, this is not just about the past. Many of the warning signs that appeared before previous currency collapses are visible again in today's world. Massive debt, endless money printing, rising inflation, and governments promising that everything is under control. History shows us that these words are often spoken just before disaster strikes. If you want to understand how money really works, how power controls currencies, and how history repeats the same mistakes again and again, then this channel is for you. Subscribe, because understanding money is no longer optional. It is survival knowledge in the modern world. Now, let us go back in time to one of the greatest civilizations humanity has ever known, and see how even the mighty Roman Empire fell, not because of invading armies, but because its money lost meaning. The Roman Empire was not just a military power. It was an economic machine that controlled trade routes, resources, and wealth across vast lands. For centuries, Roman money was trusted everywhere from Europe to the Middle East. At the heart of this system was a silver coin called the denarius. This coin worked because it was honest. Its value came from the real silver it contained, and people trusted it without hesitation. Soldiers were paid in denarius, merchants accepted it in markets, and taxes were collected using it. As long as the silver was real, the system functioned smoothly. But empires are expensive to maintain. Wars needed funding, borders needed protection, and lavish lifestyles of emperors demanded enormous resources. Instead of increasing productivity or raising taxes, which risked rebellion, Roman rulers chose a shortcut that would slowly destroy their economy. They began reducing the silver content of the denarius. At first, the change was small, almost unnoticeable. The coin looked the same, had the same stamp, and carried the same official value. But inside, it was no longer pure silver. Cheaper metals were mixed in, allowing the government to mint more coins without creating real wealth. Initially, this deception seemed successful. More money entered circulation, and the empire continued operating as usual. But over time, merchants noticed something was wrong. Prices started rising because more coins were chasing the same goods. Soldiers realized their wages bought less food and supplies than before. Trust began to weaken, even if people could not fully explain why. As decades passed, the problem worsened. By the 3rd century, The denarius had lost most of its silver content. Coins were now mostly base metals, coated with a thin layer of silver. People started rejecting Roman currency, demanding more coins for the same goods, or refusing to accept them altogether. Trade slowed down, and inflation spiraled out of control. The Roman government responded with force instead of fixing the root problem. Emperor Diocletian introduced strict price controls, declaring what goods must cost and threatening punishment for anyone who disobeyed. Instead of stabilizing the economy, this policy destroyed it further. Merchants stopped selling goods, black markets emerged, and shortages spread across the empire. As trust in money vanished, people returned to barter systems, exchanging goods directly because coins had become meaningless. Taxes were collected in food instead of currency. The Roman economy, once advanced and interconnected, began collapsing from within. Rome did not fall in a single day. It weakened slowly as its currency lost credibility. The lesson is clear. When money is manipulated, society pays the price. The Roman Empire teaches us that currency collapse does not begin with invasion or rebellion. It begins with dishonesty in money. And if you think such deception belongs only to ancient history, the next chapter will prove otherwise. Because centuries later, a modern nation repeated the same mistake, but on a scale so extreme that money became worthless overnight. After World War I, Germany was a broken nation. Its cities were damaged, its economy was weak, and its people were exhausted from years of conflict. But the real disaster did not come from the battlefield. It came from the peace agreement that followed the war. Under the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was forced to pay massive war reparations to the victorious nations. These payments were not symbolic. They were enormous and crushing, far beyond what the German economy could realistically afford. Germany faced a hard choice. It could raise taxes sharply, cut spending, and accept years of pain and political unrest, or it could choose the easier path. The government chose the shortcut. Instead of creating real economic value, it began printing money to pay its debts. At first, this decision did not seem catastrophic. More money helped the government meet its obligations. Salaries were paid, and daily life continued. But printing money does not create wealth. It only creates the illusion of wealth. As more and more paper money entered circulation, the value of the German mark began to fall. Prices started rising slowly, then faster, and then uncontrollably. What once cost 1 mark now cost 10, then 100, then thousands. The government responded by printing even more money, believing it could stay ahead of the problem. In reality, this only made things worse. By 1923, hyperinflation had taken over Germany. The currency collapsed at a speed that shocked the world. Workers were paid multiple times a day because their wages lost value within hours. Families rushed to markets immediately after receiving their pay, knowing that waiting even one afternoon could mean starvation. People carried stacks of cash in bags and wheelbarrows, not because they were rich, but because money had become almost worthless. Savings disappeared overnight. Middle-class families, who had spent decades building financial security, were destroyed. Pensioners, who relied on fixed incomes, were pushed into poverty. Life insurance policies became meaningless pieces of paper. The social contract broke down as trust in institutions vanished. Perhaps the most disturbing image from this period is how people treated money. Children played with banknotes like toys. People used stacks of cash to light fires or wallpaper their homes because it was cheaper than buying fuel or paper. Currency had lost not just value, but dignity. The psychological damage was even deeper than the economic collapse. Germans learned that hard work and honesty did not guarantee security. This loss of trust planted the seeds of anger, resentment, and political extremism. When money fails, society does not simply adjust, it fractures. Eventually, the German government was forced to act. The old currency was abandoned and replaced with a new one, backed by real assets. Inflation was stopped almost overnight, but the damage had already been done. An entire generation was traumatized, and the economic chaos helped create the conditions that later led to extreme political movements and another global catastrophe. Weimar Germany teaches us a brutal lesson. When governments believe they can print their way out of debt, they are not solving a problem. They are transferring the cost to ordinary people. Hyperinflation is not just an economic event. It is a social collapse. And yet, this was still not the worst case in history. Because the next country did the same thing, but with such extreme money printing that it produced trillion-dollar banknotes, while its citizens starved. Zimbabwe was once known as one of Africa's most promising economies. It had fertile land, valuable natural resources, and a functioning agricultural system that fed not only its own population, but also neighboring countries. For years after independence, the country showed signs of growth and stability. But beneath the surface, political decisions were slowly planting the seeds of economic disaster. The collapse began when the government started making reckless promises it could not afford. Expensive military involvement, uncontrolled public spending, and sudden land reforms destroyed agricultural productivity, the backbone of the economy. Farms that once produced food and export income stopped functioning. As production collapsed, government revenue disappeared, but spending did not stop. Instead of fixing these structural problems, Zimbabwe's leaders chose the most dangerous solution available: printing money. At first, the government printed money to pay salaries and cover budget deficits. Inflation rose, but officials insisted it was temporary. When prices continued rising, they printed even more money, believing that higher denominations would solve the problem. In reality, each new banknote made the currency weaker than before. By the mid-2000s, inflation was no longer measurable in normal terms. Prices doubled within days, sometimes within hours. A loaf of bread that cost a few dollars in the morning would cost millions by evening. Shops could not update price tags fast enough. Many simply stopped selling goods altogether because accepting money had become meaningless. The world watched in disbelief as Zimbabwe introduced banknotes worth billions, then trillions of dollars. On paper, citizens were trillionaires. In real life, they could not afford basic food. People carried bags full of cash to buy a single meal. Salaries were paid, but they were useless almost immediately. Savings were completely wiped out. Anyone who trusted the banking system lost everything. Elderly people who had worked their entire lives found themselves begging or relying on relatives abroad. Teachers, doctors, and professionals abandoned their jobs because wages could not even pay for transportation. Eventually, trust in the Zimbabwean dollar collapsed entirely. People refused to accept it. Markets began operating in foreign currencies like the US dollar and South African rand. Barter returned, just as it had in ancient Rome. Money issued by the state had failed. In a desperate move, the government officially abandoned its own currency. The Zimbabwean dollar was suspended, and foreign currencies were legalized. Inflation stopped almost instantly, not because the economy recovered, but because the broken currency was removed from the system. Zimbabwe's story shows the final stage of currency collapse. When money loses trust completely, it dies. No amount of zeros, no new banknotes, and no government speeches can bring it back. Once people reject a currency, it cannot be forced into existence. And yet, even this tragedy did not prevent other nations from repeating the same mistakes. Because the next collapse happened in a country with the largest oil reserves on Earth. Proof that natural wealth alone cannot save a currency from destruction. Venezuela's currency collapse is shocking because it happened despite the country being rich in natural resources. Venezuela holds some of the largest oil reserves in the world, and for decades, it was one of Latin America's wealthiest nations. A strong currency, subsidized fuel, and a relatively stable middle class made it seem like the economy was functioning properly. On paper, everything looked perfect. The problem began when the economy became entirely dependent on oil. During periods of high oil prices, the government massively increased public spending, launched extensive social programs, and promised citizens a level of wealth that could not be sustained. Productivity and real economic growth were ignored, and short-term gains masked structural weaknesses. When oil prices eventually fell, government revenue collapsed. Instead of cutting spending or restructuring the economy, the government turned to an old and dangerous solution: printing money. At first, this temporarily allowed salaries to be paid and government obligations to be met. But more and more currency in circulation began to erode its value rapidly. Inflation started slowly, accelerated, and eventually spiraled out of control. The government tried to artificially maintain the currency by fixing prices and controlling exchange rates. Yet these measures backfired, creating black markets and widening the gap between official and real prices. Citizens found themselves in a surreal situation. Money technically existed, but it could not buy basic necessities. Supermarkets were empty, medicine was scarce, and professionals abandoned their jobs or left the country altogether. Savings became worthless almost overnight. At the peak of the crisis, Venezuelans no longer trusted their own currency. They turned to foreign currencies, gold or barter, for survival. Even when the government issued new banknotes or removed zeros from the currency, trust was gone. Printing more money could not solve a problem rooted in economic mismanagement and lack of governance. Venezuela proves that natural resources alone cannot save a currency. When governance fails, when money is treated as a political tool, and when printing presses are used as a solution, even oil-rich countries can experience economic collapse. Currency collapse is not just an economic failure, it is a failure of leadership, discipline, and trust. The next chapter takes us to Yugoslavia, where hyperinflation destroyed an economy almost overnight, showing just how quickly trust in money can evaporate when political instability meets reckless currency printing. Throughout history, from ancient Rome to Weimar Germany, from Zimbabwe to Venezuela, Yugoslavia, and Argentina, the story is always the same. Currencies collapse not because money itself fails, but because trust in money dies. Governments overspend, print excessive currency, or manipulate economic systems for short-term gain. Citizens lose confidence, and the currency becomes worthless, even overnight. The pattern is universal. Political instability, unchecked debt, excessive printing, and the illusion of prosperity create conditions for collapse. Even natural resources, industrial power, or strong armies cannot protect a currency if trust is gone. Every collapse leaves ordinary people devastated. Savings vanish, prices soar, and daily life becomes a struggle for survival. The lesson is clear. Understand money, protect your wealth, and never assume that any currency is safe simply because it is backed by a government. Diversification, real assets, and financial awareness are essential in a world where history repeats itself. So as we close this journey through the rise and fall of currencies, remember that money is powerful but fragile. History has shown us how quickly it can die and how devastating its collapse can be. The question is not if history will repeat itself, but when. And the only way to survive is to learn from it today. If you found this documentary insightful, subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications, because understanding money, history, And economic risks is not just knowledge, it's survival. The next collapse could happen tomorrow, and preparation starts now.